number 3. We're halfway through week number 3. We are almost done with this class, just a couple weeks away. So I wanted to do a few videos. You're going to see, if you're on the modules page, you're going to see a few videos posted to do really 3 things, right? So first off, you have 3 chapters to read, chapters 3, 5, 4, and 5. And these videos are to synthesize and to help gain some of the information out. Important part of history is telling a narrative, the narrative story behind all these facts, all this information, and to create a story. And that story has some information that's important to draw out. So let's draw out some information that this textbook's talking about, some important things of this class, some themes. Stereotypes, where stereotypes come from. Identity of who we are today as an American. And whatever that means, that big loaded term of an American, where those identities come from. And it's largely, you have to look at history of where that stems from. So you're starting to see a new culture emerge in North America, and how that's developing into something new, using stuff already there present with American Indian cultures, changing from European cultures, but creating a new identity that's eventually going to create a mindset that they're separate from everybody else, separate from Europe, separate from past and American culture, creating something new. So that's a large thing we're going to talk about. And also looking at how pop culture portrays historical events, historical things that are important key events of history, and how they've altered them and changed them, created a new perception of them for an agenda, certain thing happening. Think of the first Thanksgiving. Think of how they portray Pocahontas, Disney, wonderful movie, of course. Think of the songs of that. Think of Squanto, the story of Squanto. Think of Jamestown. Think of all these founding things of American culture. And then as we get to Revolutionary War and so forth, all those things, how pop culture creates them and how historical representation, looking at evidence, sometimes clashes. And then there's clashes with those ideologies today. Think of what's happening with this idea of tearing down statues that's happening across the country. Why are they doing that? What's the point behind all that? For better or for worse, there's an interesting thing rooted in history and rooting of the representation of history and the power of imagery of history. So whatever side you take, for me as a historian, I find it fascinating. I find it wonderful that these are being talked about. So I hope you're talking about with your friends, families, in this classroom when the opportunity arises. Looking at the past is an important thing. Us as Americans have what I call historical amnesia. We forget what happened 20 years ago, let alone 250, 300 years ago. So it's important for us to understand what happens then, not only to understand what happens then, not to memorize these dates, but to understand who we are today, how our identity today is linked and connected with this events that we are looking at. So I hope you're reading, as you're reading all this information in these 3 chapters, I hope you're pulling out what this life is like there and how there's a continuity with this all, right? So you have a journal entry going to be due here. If it's Wednesday, at midnight, you're going to have your first discussion for this week due. And it's to pull out the information that you see, that you're kind of connecting to, and creating a identity of a person based on this historical evidence we're looking at. What is it like in this early colonial life? So I think that'll be interesting. So that's the one thing, is to pull out the information. Another reason, an important reason too, is to kind of, again, pull out these themes, but to tie that all together with your exam that's going to be happening in a couple weeks when we finish this class. So one of the last videos you're going to see here, and I hope you spend some time, I'm going to start talking about information of how the exam's going to work. So it's going to be very limited. There's not much, there's going to be some, but not as many points as for multiple choice type questions, true and false. Those are all things that are good for reading quizzes, but for real understanding of history in a university and a college setting, remember, it's not about memorization of dates. It's not a memorization of things. It's how to critically think about that information and to put it into and put it all together into a story and to give an argument with it. So some key questions that you'll see at the end of the reading of the chapters, I'm going to probably use some of those and I'll talk about it. But you're going to use this information from the text. That's why it's an open book. You're going to use the information from the textbook to create an answer to these questions with your worldviews, with your understanding of the past, with the discussions that we've had, everything tying together to help answer these larger questions. So there'll be short questions, there'll be long questions, there will be some multiple choice. Some of it you'll recognize from the readings that we've already had. So all that plays together in that exam. So I'll talk about that as well. And then the third thing, some interesting narrative stories. Some stories that we've had, that we've heard since, if you've been in American cultures, you've heard about these stories. So I want to create a narrative based on some historical stuff that we have, to show a different side of stories, a different side of history, and show, think of why the story may differ. What are some of the stories that you constantly hear about the American past, and how that bolsters one identity? And if it's not historically accurate, what's the point of that? There was an agenda there, right? For an example, coming up, you have Columbus Day, which people are throwing more and more as calling Indigenous Peoples Day. Well, the very first Columbus Day, happening in the late 1800s, was for a specific agenda, using history, saying Columbus discovered the New World. You all know very well, he didn't discover it. There was Americans already there. What he did is he created, for us, right? He created a new world system of exchange, right? So it created a larger thing. But to say discover, that silences a whole people's history. So there's a problem. But there was an agenda to create Columbus Day. Columbus Day was formed in the late 1800s, at the same time where you get all this immigration happening, specifically from Europe, a lot of Italians, a lot of Eastern Europeans, a lot of people from Ireland and certain Europeans. Then you get Chinese and all these people as well. That time period, they didn't think of those as potential American citizens. That's a whole nother story. But they had all these new immigrants coming with these new identities and trying to create one identity. For a lot of white Europeans, it's easy to grasp the concept of the founding fathers. That comes from the same background. But what about all these other new immigrants who are becoming citizens? They need a single person to have the center founding story with. So what about this Italian explorer who works with the Spanish crown and to create and discover this new land? That works really well. And that story of Columbus starts to be this idea of founding identity for an American culture, Columbus Day. So there's an agenda when they create events like Columbus Day of uniting the country, and at the same time splitting it apart with some other parts of it. So an interesting story, and how history is used in a powerful way, how history is used with a political agenda as we see today, but to understand the truth of it and to understand how to ratify and to create changes with the story of history is an important thing. So that's what we're going to talk about in these few videos. Hope you have a chance to watch them. We're going to look at chapters 3, chapters 4, chapter 5, very briefly, very broadly. If you have questions that we don't cover, throw me an email. Love to chat with you about it. And then the very last lecture that you're going to see, the video, will help give some more information of the readings. What I'm going to create is a big discussion piece that you're going to see posted on the module page that's going to continuously go, that you can collaborate with the whole class, ask questions, how to answer certain things, all that stuff to help work together. So you could use that information for the exam as well. Okay? Again, more questions, anything you have, comments, throw me an email. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a great day, and we'll chat with you soon.